So this is the 500 watt.
She's double broken.
It says B500, so it looks like it's bicolor. Okay, so this is just a very basic skin tone test using this zhiyun 500 watt bicolor light. Rolling here. We're out here in the Norris Dam, just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. And I believe this specific location, according to Apple Watch here, we're in Rocky Top. Rocky Top. That's cool. What we're going to be talking about today is this light right here from zhiyun-tech Global. Now, they're calling this the Molus B series, B for bicolor. This is the Molus bicolor series lamp. They sent me the 100 watt, the 200 watt, and those ones I didn't mess around with too much. The primary unit that I used in real world scenarios, which we'll be looking at today, we used the 500 watt bicolor unit on a PBS series, using it in a very generic way, nothing huge and cinematic, just for interview talking head scenarios, blasting it through a 6-foot wag flag of magic cloth. Every now and then maybe bouncing it, creating a book light out of it, shooting it into a white B-board, and then building a book light with a 4x ultra bounce flop, and then shoving it through the 6 foot of magic cloth. So it is a pretty powerful lamp, especially for how tiny it is. It is a very, very tiny lamp. Even someone on set had mentioned that to us, like, wow, that little light is 500 watts. And it is actually bicolor too. So the range is like 2700 to 6500 Kelvin. I'm gonna show you the renderings of each of those now. So these are TM30 charts and SSI comparison charts. If you haven't seen anything like this before, I've done a full video on how to interpret these things and understand what all of these charts and numbers mean. I'll leave a link to it down in the description below. Okay, I do want to point out that the lamp does lean towards magenta at all of the CCT values. The only time that it was super, super clean in terms of color rendering was at 2700 Kelvin. So there you can see that it was pretty perfect, which is pretty impressive for a bicolor LED unit. But not so impressive when you're talking about a normal generic setting like 5600 Kelvin. That is kind of a bummer that it pushes so far magenta at 5600 Kelvin. It does that with the hyperreflector and without the hyperreflector. So let's get in here and look at the statistics of what we got. So first of all, let's talk about the output. So the main output at 3 meters, and I test all of my lights at 3 meters. So if you're new here, you don't know that, I'll have a playlist to all of my light reviews down in the description below. But this bad boy, the 500 watt, was giving me 552 foot candles at 3 meters, which is equivalent to 5,950 lux. So what does that mean? Well, let's compare it to a couple of other units. That means it is 5% less output than the Nanlite Forza 500. Now keep in mind, the Forza 500 is a daylight only fixture, so that's pretty impressive, this one being bicolor, and it's only 5% less than the Forza 500. That's pretty impressive. If we compare it to something like a light that I recently reviewed here, the GVM 650B, it is 2.5% more output than the GVM 650B. So that's interesting because the GVM is pulling 150 watts more power. The little zhiyun light is actually 2.5% more. So that was pretty impressive. However, we'll circle back around to this because I do have my thoughts and opinions on which one I would choose in terms of a bicolor light. If we compare it to something like the Aputure 600X, well, even then, the little zhiyun 500 watt is still 6% more than the Aputure 600X in terms of pure output. Now, all of these are with the hyperreflector attached, okay? So I'm gonna let this hot rod zoom on by here. Got some choppers rolling in. So yeah, the zhiyun is 6% more output than the Aputure 600X. Now, in terms of a daylight, another daylight only fixture such as the Aputure 600D, the zhiyun is 43% less output than the Aputure 600D. Okay, so this is just a very basic skin tone test using this Zhiyun 500 watt bicolor light. It is set to 5600 Kelvin. It's only giving me 5500 Kelvin. It's just we want to see what's going on with the skin tone. So this is very neutralized color, matching the white balance of what the light is giving me internally in camera. Let's hold off because I do want to share my thoughts on which light I would choose because I know that's what most people care about. Let's talk about price, okay? The 500 watt is going for $719 US. The 100 watt is $229. The 200 watt, $359. And then they also have a 300 watt unit that I was not able to test, and the 300 watt is $539. I always like to go for the biggest and brightest that I can get my hands on, so we're just going to keep focusing on the 500 watt Zhiyun Molus light. So if we compare that to something like the GVM, okay, because I think the GVM lights are the direct competitors to this company like Zhiyun, okay? So the GVM 500 is selling for $800, and the GVM 650B is selling for $848 US. However, we know that versus the 650B, that the Zhiyun light is going to be 2.5% more output. That's not a whole lot more, but if we know that it's 2.5% more than the 650, it's going to be at least 5% more than the GVM 500, okay? And all of these units are bicolor, right? So that's something to think about if all you care about is pure output. However, that's not all that I would care about. I mean, output obviously is something that we should all pay attention to, but what we need to pay attention to is the features, the professional features that the fixture offers, the build quality of the fixture, and more importantly, the color rendering, okay? And if you have not seen my breakdown and review of the GVM 650B, I'll have a link to that down in the description below. Here's what I have to say about these Zhiyun lights, okay? They are very tiny. However, the build quality is not professional in my opinion. They're primarily plastic. The yoke is plastic, okay? So you're talking about every time you're gonna tilt the lamp, over time, over usage, it's going to break. All right, you're dealing with plastic parts versus aluminum or metal parts, which you're going to get on units such as that GVM 650B. You're certainly going to have professional build quality on any Aperture product. So those are things to consider big time for me. I also want to let you listen to the fan noise because the fans on these Zhiyun lights are not controllable. You have no control over the fan. And when you're working in a real world setting, especially for talking heads like how we used it, and the sound guy did approach me and asked me on the PBS series if I was able to adjust the fan noise on that Zhiyun light, and I was not able to do that. So that's something to consider if you're wanting to use these for anything where you need audio and you need clean audio. So here's the fan noise on those Zhiyun lights now. It's now set to 100%, full throttle here. So I thought I'd capture this on the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. Okay, so I've just finished testing it at all 5 color temps. This fan has not kicked off. It seems that this is very common with the Zhiyun's 200 watt lamp that I also tested, is that these fans, once they kick on, they do not kick off. And this is how loud they are. Now, if I had my choice, I would choose the GVMs. I would choose the GVM 650B. There's a couple reasons why. Beyond the build quality and beyond the better color rendering is the GVMs allows me to control the dimming curve. It allows me to control that fan. It has a lot of really nice custom presets, because that's another thing. These Zhiyun lights have nothing special. All you have is a CCT range from 2700 to 6500 Kelvin, and you have a dimmer. Now, granted, that's a stepless dimmer at 1% increments, but that is all you're gonna get. That's all you're gonna get. You can't attach V-mounts, so you always have to have mains power with those Zhiyun lights. There's not a whole lot of features there. Right, so these are lights that I think would have to be in a very small studio setting. All of my main full-time YouTuber guys out there, those might be a good light for you. But if you're talking about a light that you want to use day to day, in and off the truck, a real world working scenario, right? the zhiyuns would not be on any of my trucks, let's just say that, okay? But I do want to give a shout out to Zhiyun for sending those out and letting me test those things out and see what they're all about. They're interesting, they're very powerful, they're very tiny, but the build quality is not so hot. The color rendering is a little iffy in my opinion. Unless you're a guy that loves to shoot at 2700 Kelvin, then that might be the cleanest LED light in terms of bicolor range that you might ever get your hands on. Other than that, if you want pro features, dimming curve, control that fan, power on V-mounts, you could be out here with something like a GVM or an aperture light. Yeah, I couldn't be out here with something like that Zhiyun light, so just a heads up on that. We'll see you guys wherever we'll see you next. Isn't this beautiful out here? This is wild, man. Enjoy that drone footage. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you. It's so crazy. These lights don't come in a kit, a case. You don't get no case. This is the 500 watt, no case.